Hi everyone, my name is Emma and I'm a Catalyst support team member. Welcome to Catalyst virtual session, inauguration analysis, and MLK event preface. Catalyst is an initiative with the mission to advance a city-centered ethos on campus and augment North Park University's commitment to the just flourishing of cities. Our Catalyst on campus virtual sessions will run every other Wednesday from 12:30 to 2 p.m. to create dialogue and encourage action within our campus. I'd like to give a shout out to all of our students, staff, faculty, and community for tuning in and watching. We appreciate everyone who is taking the time to learn and engage with us.
And at this time, Marcus Payne will lead us in a reading, a reflection on the events, the happenings of the past couple weeks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. I will begin to read a joint statement that the Office of Diversity and Office of the Catalyst Hub have put together in response to a couple weeks ago events. First of all, we would like to welcome our students, faculty, staff, and guests to our Catalyst on Campus event of this semester. As we begin this event today to discuss the inauguration and new administration coming into office, our offices, the Office of Diversity and Intercultural Learning, as well as the Catalyst Hub, our Office of Civic Engagement and Experiential Learning, thought it would be necessary to say a few words about insurrection that took place at the Capitol building just a couple weeks ago. We also like to mention that this event and these words are also given in the context of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, which took place this last Monday.
Recently, in the aftermath of the insurrection, the words of Alicia Crosby resonated with many. She said, quote, "Please stop relying on caricatures of white supremacists. Their hate is not bound by class, profession, level of education, faith, or belief system, ability of disability, age, region, etc. This is a global phenomenon with global actors. One of the most dangerous lies they want folks to believe is that they look a certain way because it allows them to hide in plain sight," end quote.
The events that took place called us to action, and those who work in higher education have an important role to play. White supremacy does not merely occur over there. White supremacy does not simply happen over there. It is here at North Park. We would be naive to assume that our own students, our own faculty and staff, our own community are not susceptible to the lies and innuendos perpetuated by white nationalists.
And for this reason, in light of the legacy of faith at North Park, a university founded upon the belief in a God who took on the frailty of human flesh in a colonized region, a divine protest against empire, a protest that culminated in a different kind of kingdom. We believe it is important that we as a community continue to advocate for critical thought in honoring the Imago Dei and others. The vile display of a noose at the insurrection is an expression of dissent, is the very symbol of a movement built upon the white supremacy that justified chattel slavery and Jim Crow.
With our community's interest in mind, with impact over intent in mind, we encourage and employ our students, our faculty, and our staff to commit to the work of racial equality, championed by all of us, alongside the work of civil engagement, facilitated by the Catalyst Hub, and the Office of Civil Engagement and Experiential Learning, and the Office of Diversity and Intercultural Life here at North Park University.
And we've witnessed what is at stake, our dignity as a people and our democracy. Well, thank you to our Office of Diversity, Director Myricks, Assistant Director Payne. We also want to thank you, Emma, for leading us in, as well as Andy Larson, our program staff. We want to thank all of you for joining us today. And now we'll continue on our program as we discuss the inauguration. We've just witnessed a historic event that takes place every 4 years, and one we should not take for granted, especially in these times, the peaceful transition of power. Although the past few weeks were fraught with many challenges, we now look at the present moment, the very institution of the inauguration and the political path forward. To help inform this conversation, we're joined by North Park University's own political science faculty, Dr. Joe Alulis and Dr. John Peterson. They will both offer historical and political context for the inauguration. If our audience has any questions, please include them in our chat, and our faculty members will do their best to address them after their comments. And so first, we'd like to welcome Dr. Alulis to give his comments. Welcome.
Thank you, Rich. There are many ways in which the inauguration today was unusual. And I want to look at just one, and that is that Donald Trump, the outgoing president, did not attend the inauguration of Joseph Biden, his successor. Now, there have been 36 transitions from one president to another in our history. And this has happened before, but only 3 times. So let's look at these 3 other occasions. The first time was in 1801. John Adams did not attend the inauguration of Thomas Jefferson. There are 3 things noteworthy about this occasion. First, the election was highly divisive. It was the age of the French Revolution, and Jefferson was associated with revolutionaries and atheism, while Adams was associated with Britain and constitutional order. It was also the first time in which power passed from one party to another, that is, from the Federalists, the party of Adams, to the Democratic Republicans, the party of Jefferson. Finally, it was the first time the outgoing president had been defeated in his bid for another term. When John Adams was inaugurated, George Washington, the outgoing president, had not just lost an election, and they were both Federalists. The next time was in 1829. John Quincy Adams did not attend the inauguration of Andrew Jackson. Here again, the election was a factor. Historians Robert Rimini and Terry Colway call the election of 1828 the nastiest because of personal attacks by both candidates on the other regarding impropriety in sexual conduct. There was also an ideological dimension. Adams was not only for a stronger national government and Jackson for states' rights, but Adams was highly educated and had extensive political experience, while Jackson represented the common man and was associated with radical democracy, radical for that time. This was only the second time in which there was a transition from one party to another, namely the National Republican Party of Adams and the Democratic Party of Jackson. Finally, there was a personal dimension. The nastiness of the campaign involved attacks on Jackson's wife because she was a divorcee, and at the time of her marriage to Jackson, the divorce was not legal. She died of a heart attack shortly after the election, and Jackson blamed Adams for it. The third time was in 1869, in the wake of the Civil War. Andrew Johnson remained at work in the White House while Ulysses S. Grant was inaugurated. This case was different from the first 2, and today, in that Johnson did not lose an election to his successor and was nominally a part of the same party, the Republican Party. But they belonged to different wings of the party. Johnson, from the border state of Tennessee, was for a softer reconstruction of the defeated states of the Confederacy, while Grant owed his office to the support of those who favored a harder reconstruction. Johnson was the first president to be impeached. At issue was the president's right to dismiss a member of his cabinet, something that is now accepted as a presidential prerogative. Johnson had dismissed Edwin Stanton as Secretary of War over differences regarding Reconstruction, and named Grant as the interim occupant of the office, pending Senate confirmation. Instead, the Senate reinstated Stanton and Grant resigned. Johnson felt Grant had betrayed him. Finally, when it came time for the inauguration, Grant told the planners that he would not ride to the Capitol in the same carriage with Johnson. This slight prompted Johnson to decide not to go at all. If we compare these cases to today, all seem to have come after a divisive election or in the context of a highly divisive issue. Last fall's election was depicted by one side as a battle for the nation's soul, and by the other as a fight to save the country from socialism. Two of the former cases, 1829 and 1869, involved perceived slights or offenses. And as Donald Trump has still not accepted the idea that he was defeated, he feels slighted. Finally, in one of the former cases, 1869, the president who did not attend had been impeached, and his successor was closely associated with those who attempted to eject him from office. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Dr. Lulis, for that helpful context. Very interesting and amazing to really place that in the context of history as we talk about the inauguration today. And so for that point, we'll be joined by Dr. Peterson, who will lead us in this next conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you, Professor Lulis. First of all, welcome back to students, faculty, and staff for second semester. It's good to see everyone again. What I want to do in the next few moments is talk about today, what occurred in three parts. First of all, as Professor Lulis mentioned, the history-making events of today with the Biden inauguration. And secondly, I want to talk about the specific schedule, what is happening even now as we're meeting. And then what do the next few days and weeks ahead hold for the new Biden administration? So those of you who've been to DC, have visited the district or are familiar with it, you know the National Mall is a 5-mile stretch of land in the middle of the district, anchored at one end by the US Capitol building and anchored at the other end by the Lincoln Memorial. And to link these two events that we're talking about today, it was of course at the Lincoln Memorial where Dr. King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech in 1963, August of 1963, which has been called by scholars of public address the greatest American speech of the 20th century. If you follow King's vision from the Lincoln Memorial, halfway between is the Washington Monument, and then past that is the west front of the Capitol. And that's where President Biden was sworn in today. Most inaugurations in American history were held on the other side of the Capitol building, the east side, which is technically the front door of the Capitol. But in 1981, Ronald Reagan was sworn in on the west front of the Capitol. And that was to accommodate the larger crowd sizes that they could fit, and they wouldn't have to build a viewing stand on the west front of the Capitol. What was odd, of course, today was that even though the mall can hold many thousands of people and the viewing stand can hold up to 3,000 people, there were very few people in attendance. And that was almost entirely due to the COVID pandemic. And part of it was due to the events that happened a couple weeks ago, but most of the small crowd was due to pandemic considerations. So first of all, a few bits of history. It's been said a lot, at 78 years old, Joe Biden is now the oldest president in American history. Ronald Reagan was 77 years old when he left office in 1989. Joe Biden is 78 upon entering office. Biden also enters office with the most elective experience of any president in American history, 47 years. Most of that in the Senate, also 8 years as vice president. He follows someone who had no elective experience. Donald Trump one of the very few presidents to have no elective experience. And just to put this in some historical context, President Biden has about 16 years more elective experience than the next most experienced president, which was James Buchanan. Joe Biden is the first president from Delaware. He is the second Roman Catholic president after John Kennedy. He is also the 15th vice president to become president of the United States. That's the clearest path to the presidency, is through the vice presidency. We've had 15 vice presidents become president and 10 governors. Kamala Harris, we've talked a little bit about her already. She made history in her own right. 100 years after women won the right to vote with the 19th Amendment, we now have a woman vice president of the United States. And we have our first second gentleman of the United States. It's going to take a little bit getting used to. Kamala's husband, Doug Emhoff, is the second gentleman of the United States. Kamala Harris is also the first African-American vice president and the first South Asian American to be vice president. As Professor Alulis mentioned, Donald Trump was the first losing incumbent to skip the inauguration since Andrew Johnson in 1869, when he lost to Ulysses Grant. But perhaps more than anything else, it's the massive security presence, 25,000 National Guardsmen and women, large numbers of Secret Service, DC police, and police officers from other metro areas that's going to dominate at least the visuals for this inauguration. Let me talk next about some of the events of today. So President Biden and his wife, Jill Biden, spent the night at Blair House across from the White House last night. Donald Trump and Melania Trump spent their last night at the White House. The Trumps left for Florida early in the morning. Biden, along with congressional leaders, went to morning mass at the Cathedral of St. Matthew the Apostle. President Biden was sworn in by Chief Justice John Roberts on a family Bible, 1893 family Bible, on which Biden has taken every oath of office, president, vice president, and senator. If you saw the inauguration, it's a 5-inch thick Bible with a lot of family history. Joe Biden gave a 20-minute inaugural address that was about as long as Trump's inaugural address, about as long as Obama's inaugural address, kind of in the middle of inaugural addresses. We can talk more about his speech a little bit later. Again, there were only 3,000 guests on the Capitol grounds. When I worked in DC as a congressional staff person, and in 1997, I went to Bill Clinton's second inaugural. And it's just night and day to see what happened today. Normally, there are more than 200,000 people there. And members of Congress get several tickets that they can give to family and staff. I got one of those tickets when I worked for a congressman. This year, members of Congress got one ticket. Other than themselves, they had one ticket, and most of them would bring their spouses. So there were only 3,000 people on the Capitol grounds today. The mall was completely empty. Instead, there were 191,500 American flags that were put in the mall, and those flags represented those that are unable to attend, or that were unable to attend the inauguration. Last night, maybe you saw the service commemorating COVID victims as well. So what's going on now? I think probably a few minutes ago, or actually right now, there's a signing ceremony happening in the Capitol building where President Biden is signing a number of executive orders into law. That will be followed by a wreath-laying ceremony. He and the other living presidents, aside from President Carter, President Bush, President Obama, President Clinton, will all be going to Arlington Cemetery to lay a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. That will be happening this afternoon. Then there will be a virtual parade down Pennsylvania Avenue, and the Bidens will be brought by military escort to the White House. Tonight, there will be a Celebrating America TV special in lieu of inaugural balls. We're not going to have inaugural balls like we normally do. And so a lot is different about this inauguration. That last bullet point gives some examples. There was no honorary departure. The honorary departure usually happens when the outgoing president leaves by Marine One, leaves by helicopter from the Capitol grounds to go to Andrews Air Force Base and then to return to civilian life. That didn't happen today. That helicopter departure started in 1977 with Gerald Ford leaving for Jimmy Carter, and this will be the first year that that hasn't happened since then. There also is not a Capitol luncheon. The members of Congress usually host a Capitol luncheon after the swearing-in ceremony. That was canceled due to COVID. And the first inaugural ball took place with George Washington in 1789, and every year since Harry Truman in 1949, but there are no inaugural balls taking place this evening. So other changes from the norm. Let me see that last slide. We need to talk about what's going to be happening in the next few days and the next few weeks. So today, part of that signing ceremony that President Biden is participating in right now, he'll be signing a number of executive orders into law and undoing a lot of executive orders from the Trump administration. Those of you who know the difference recognize that executive orders are laws that the president can direct his executive agencies to follow, and they don't require congressional passage. But executive orders are only as good as the president who wants them to be there. Any succeeding president can undo the executive orders of a previous president. So it doesn't have the permanence of congressional law. So President Biden is going to be undoing a lot of Trump's actions, even as we speak. For example, he's rescinding Trump's travel ban from largely Muslim nations. He will be rejoining the United States in the Paris Climate Accord. He will be expanding abortion access by rescinding the so-called Mexico City policy. He will be implementing facial mask mandates on federal property and interstate travel. The president doesn't have the authority to make sure that people wear masks in the states, but interstate commerce, travel between states and on federal grounds, the president does have the ability to enforce masks. He'll also be extending student loan forgiveness programs. He'll be halting the Keystone Pipeline permit and other executive orders. In addition to that, in the next few days, we can expect President Biden to send some important legislation to Congress. Most importantly, perhaps, is the $1.9 trillion economic stimulus and pandemic relief bill that he has pledged and that the now Democratic majorities in the House and Senate have agreed to take up. And just a couple of days ago, he outlined an immigration reform, a path to citizenship bill that's going to be going to Congress. And that could, of course, be very historically important as well. President Biden has pledged to vaccinate 100 million Americans in the first 100 days of his administration. And yesterday, Dr. Anthony Fauci said that was a realistic goal. So we can expect vaccination stations to be opening up all over the country. And then, of course, there is an impending impeachment trial for the outgoing president. President Trump was impeached, the first president to be impeached twice. He was impeached for inciting insurrection at the Capitol, and a trial will begin in the Senate in the coming days. And the question, of course, there will not be removing him from office, but if the Senate decides to convict President Trump, he could be barred from ever holding elective office again. All of these things President Biden will be confronting in his first 100 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson, for that very, very helpful context. And it's really good to get situated in terms of what's taking place today, especially for a day of change. It seems like there's so many shifts and precedents. We would love to bring back actually Dr. Peterson and Dr. Alulis just for a couple brief questions before we move on with our program. The first question being, are there elements of President Biden's first speech, still getting used to saying that, elements of his first speech as president that really stood out to you today?
Well, I saw the text. I consulted the internet to see the text, so I didn't actually see the speech delivered. One of the things that struck me was the way it was a repudiation of the Trump style of politics that we've seen since he was a candidate back in 2015. So again and again, the importance of truth-telling. There's one line about taking the fury out of politics, which makes me think of the Fire and Fury book, toning down, lowering our voice. So I think it was clearly a reprimand for Trump's norm breaking. And I've got to think that with some exceptions in the House, most members of Congress have got to think it was well deserved. This I know I'd be interested in hearing other people's opinions, especially my colleague, Professor Peterson, but I don't think anyone found this very helpful, this style of politics. It was also an attempt to marginalize violence, which should be the rule. I mean, violence should be at the margin, but clearly a reproach also to the kind of violence that's been stirred up and nativism. So those were the things that struck me.
Thank you.
What struck me was a lot of invocations of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln's always quoted, but especially today, I was jotting down as I was watching the speech. I didn't catch all of them, but Joe Biden talked about the better angels of our nature. He talked about giving the last full measure of devotion. He quoted Lincoln's first inaugural when he said that we must see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. Lincoln, of course, said we must not see each other as enemies, but as friends. He even mentioned Lincoln in his first inauguration, said to someone, "My whole soul is in uniting the nation." And then President Biden said, "My whole soul is in this task." So a lot of Lincoln imagery, a lot of unity imagery, as Professor Alulis said. He talked about, the need that we need each other. We're facing a dark winter. He used that term a few times. He notably never mentioned Donald Trump by name, but Donald Trump was very present, and his style of politics was very present in the speech. So that's what stood out to me is the invocations of Lincoln, and it's not by coincidence, of course, that he did that. We're a very divided country.
Yes, thank you for that. And especially given the fact that Lincoln governed in the midst of a civil war and so much of the animus of that time, we at this time are facing incredible tumult and challenge. And when we observed the inauguration today, and when we look at President Biden's initial agenda, I'm just curious to see what you both think in terms of the prospects of healing and building legislative consensus in the midst of great partisan divide.
Well, it may be that I'm just optimistic. I'm feeling the good vibes of the moment of the speech that President Biden gave, but I'm inclined to be optimistic. But there are worrying things out there. Some of them you can name. That is to say, individual members of Congress who are competing for the mantle of Trump to inherit his followers. And I guess I don't spend a lot of time with people with whom I disagree really radically, and I don't know how strong the feeling is in other parts of the country. I mean, I've never set foot in some of the places that are Trump strongholds, and that would be a reality check. It might be that these forces of disunion are stronger than I feel comfortable admitting. But I just think that Trump was too much, at least from my perspective, and that people are kind of sobered by what happened on January 6th and might be willing to say enough is enough. The people who were in the Capitol on January 6th were not part of any coordinated action, which was pretty clear. So it may be that we're dealing with people who really are just on the margins of society and the margins of American life. And people are going to take that as a wake-up call. And so we'll see. I mean, we won't know until we see what develops, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
Biden made I didn't write his quote down, but he made a pledge to those who didn't vote for him, as presidents often do. And it was basically, give me a chance, see my heart, see where I am. And he said, and if after doing that, you don't agree with me, then don't agree with me. That's democracy. So we shouldn't look for an end to partisan division. Partisan division is very healthy in a democracy, but what we should look for an end to is the kind of violence and vitriol that we saw spin out of control. So I am optimistic that we can get back to disagreeing without violence and having a loyal opposition party. That's perfectly fine in a democracy. I would, if you didn't get a chance to see the inauguration, I would really recommend that you watch at least 3 parts. Aside from the speech and the swearing in, Lady Gaga's national anthem was fantastic. She really delivered it well. And then Garth Brooks sang Amazing Grace and then asked everybody to join in on the chorus. And then he went around hugging everybody. But even beyond that, Amanda Gorman, the 2017 Youth Poet Laureate of the United States, wrote and delivered just a beautiful poem. And I was writing too many things down to quote her, but she said in her, but you absolutely should watch it. She said, "Our nation isn't broken, it's unfinished." That was the theme of her poem, not a broken nation, but an unfinished one. And all of us together have to see the light and be the light. I'm not doing justice to her delivery. It was a very beautiful poem. So I like others, I get caught up in these pageants of democracy, and there's a lot of symbolism in today, but that symbolism is very substantive as well. I think it's very important that we go through these ceremonies every 4 years, and that they can be the ground of rebuilding what has been broken. I'm optimistic.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Peterson, Dr. Lulis. I know that we've leaned on you a lot these past few weeks for your insights and comments, and they're extremely helpful. So I just want to thank you both so much for taking the time to be with us today. And on that note, we hope that this analysis has been helpful for all of our audience to really contextualize the inauguration from the perspective of political science. So if anyone's undecided in terms of your major, there are two great faculty that you may want to talk to going forward. So thank you so much. Appreciate that. And now, this moment we'll be joined by our Assistant Director of Diversity and Intercultural Life, Marcus Payne, as we transition into a panel discussion to really frame this conversation on the inauguration in light of the reflections on Dr. King and the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. So I'll hand it off to Marcus Payne and he'll take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kong, for that introduction. And thank you again to Dr. Peterson and Dr. Lulis for that valuable insight. As someone who has not really studied political science as much, I appreciated the insights that you all provided, as I have learned a lot in this moment. As Director Kong mentioned, in this second part of our program this afternoon, we will be looking at some reflections by North Park students on kind of their views and opinions of how Dr. King has affected their life. But before we do that, we will have a short MLK tribute video that is comprised of both reflections of both faculty, staff, and students. And so please give me a real quick moment as I begin to share my screen for this video, and I hope you enjoy.
There are a lot of things that MLK Day means to me. I think the main three words that come to mind is gratitude and pride and the hustle. I think gratitude is just feeling grateful for the men and women and children who fought for justice for themselves and for me to come. And the reason I'm able to do the things I'm doing now, that I receive the education that I have the job and everything that I do, I know it's all to them. So I'm grateful for that. Pride of just to know the blood that runs through me and knowing that these people who stood in March, who gave their bodies, who gave their voices, who gave their time, who gave all of them, like, runs through me. That gives me so much pride. And just a reminder of the hustle, that there's still so many injustices that are going on, not only in this country, but in the world, and that I'm still called to stand and amplify my voice and call and demand for justice for all.
Hey, North Park fam. So the question is, what does Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. mean to me? A lot, really. I mean, he means a legacy, a point in time when a new form of media was used to further the rights and the the humanity of Black people particularly, but really civil rights are everybody's concern. And so, he's somebody who I think, embodied that. Now, of course, we know that he wasn't the only one involved in this, but when we think of Dr. King, we think of, at least for me, I think of, again, just the work, the daily work, the engagement, the ongoing involvement in a community, building from the ground up, grassroots. That's part of what I think of. And I also think of just, blood, sweat, and tears, because that's a large part of what he gave up on. So, yeah, that is what the day and the person mean to me.
To me, MLK Day means to commemorate the work that has come before me and the work that has come after me during a time of change in Black lives. Martin Luther King taught us that it is important to advocate for ourselves and getting rights and getting fair treatment and laws that protects Black Americans as well. Martin Luther King was a staple for the community and taught us that it is okay to march, it is okay to be angry, but in a unified and respectful way.
Putting what Martin Luther King Day means to me in words is extremely difficult. But if I had to describe it, I'd say that Martin Luther King Day is a reminder of those who have fought the fight against oppression. It is also a day of celebration of the strides that have been made towards equality. Martin Luther King Day is also a reminder that the fight for equality and justice is not yet over, and there is still much to be won.
What does MLK Day mean to me? I think of the phrase, give honor to whom honor is due, and the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Is just a day to give him honor and acknowledge the work that he did on behalf of all people of goodwill, not just the people of color. But yeah, I think he deserves that moment to be intentional about highlighting who he was, what he stood for, and what he sacrificed for the good of all people. That's what it means to me.
I think often of the ending of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, in which he stresses the need for freedom to ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, before we can truly sing out, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. Unfortunately, the tensions and very public cases of police brutality in 2020 demonstrate just how many places around our country do not ring with freedom. And following Martin Luther King's example, we all have to make sure we speak up for the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized. We all have to create a conscience of social justice. Thank you.
I can recall vividly the first time that I ever read Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail. In Dr. King's words, I found solace. His words opened my heart to the practical truths of faith. The truth for me was that the fight and the struggle to attain right standing before God requires us to show up wherever injustice exists. And those words from Dr. King that he shared in Letter from Birmingham jail still drive the work that I do today, because I'm very much committed to the fight against injustice.
Martin Luther King Jr. and all the people who stood with him really impacted how I go about my worship and how I go about my work. If you really study and know about Martin Luther King and many of the people who stood with him, his spirituality, his faith, his beliefs is all what guided him to stand for justice, to march for justice, but to do it all in love, all in peace, and doing it for every single human being. His focus wasn't just on one group of people. He was wanting justice for all, and that really impacts how I go about my worship and letting my worship be how it guides my life and how it guides my work. That I do all my work with love and compassion, and that I'm always seeking out justice for those in everything that I do.
I am pursuing a politics and government degree and a biblical and theological studies degree, so a lot of what he's done as a activist within the faith realm has been really inspirational to me and something that I've been trying really hard to understand, because there's a lot of quotes and things he talked about that didn't directly pertain to peace. They pertained to riots and they pertained to the idea of injustice, and I think that his talk has really impacted the way that I look at injustice, and talking about like injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That pertains to all facets of life, and I think that it's something we kind of neglect to think about. And same with like the language of a riot. Like things have changed in the world, and it's really impacted me to try and understand like why a riot would happen. Is the language of the unheard. Why don't we listen to people? Why don't we hear them? And I think that's something that I've really taken from that is like, we need to listen, we need to hear, we need to act in the way that people want us to, people who have experienced it want us to.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. advanced the vision of the beloved community. In doing so, I believe he gave us the moral vision that community in and of itself is simply not good enough anymore. If I'm in community with my friends or my school or my church, with people who reflect my own social location, that's not good enough. Beloved community calls us to reimagine society, a society imbued with love, kindness, and civility. It informs how we do public policy, our priorities, and the conversations we ought to have. This belief, Dr. King's belief in us, and what we could become as a society, informs my work every day.
I mean, this is a big question. Y'all giving a brother 60 seconds to answer. That's like, you know, them debates where you go to and cats be like, yeah, tell us in 50 seconds, you know, how do you plan to solve world hunger? All right, I'll give it a couple things. I mean, I think we have to deal first with the issue of white nationalism and white supremacy. As I always tell my students, you don't have to be white to be white. White is a culture. White is an ideological framework. It exists in so many facets and forms of the way we do church, the way we do money, the way we understand even getting together in meetings. And that has to be dismantled, and that's not going to come easy. We are at a state now in a position where we have no common ground or common footing for truth and what is fact. Everybody now contends that their fact is fact. And we've entered an era of really relativistic thought that doesn't have really any end to it. That's systematic and that's by design. And if you want to know more about that, you can take myself for a class on that. But where do we got to go? We got to begin to unpack white supremacy in all its forms. And its understanding of church, its understanding of capitalism, its understanding of violence, state-sponsored violence. The legacy of MLK is easy to overlook because we're now past just marching. Marching is great, don't get me wrong, but we're so much into now policy. I could care less how much you march. What are the policies that affect us and people that look like me in this country? We have a lot of work to do.
Martin Luther King Jr. impacted my work by showing me a way to go at it. So Martin Luther King had courage, drive, commitment, and dedication to having a world that accepted Black Americans for who they are. It was a time of change and it was a time of need. He gathered people, white, Black, Hispanic, it didn't matter. As long as you believed in the cause and you knew that equality was needed for all people, not just some. I think it was very important and it drives me now, like even in my career in business, I know that I'm gonna make a staple and I'm gonna make a difference. And I know it's gonna be hard for me as an African-American woman. However, I know that I can do it. By the success, by the drive, by having motivation and building a great community around me, just as Martin Luther King did. I think those are the important aspects that we all have to look at and take a step back and think, how has our own community impacted us and how it impacted Martin Luther King when he was going and having his success story as well.
How has Dr. King's life impacted my life? Wow, in so many ways. I think he was radical. He knew his stuff. He was a reader. He was educated, and it's not enough to just be able to articulate it, but to put it into practice. I think he was rooted biblically. Everything that he talked about was about fairness and equality. I mean, that's rooted in the gospel story. But he knew how to contextualize it for the right time, the right context, the right place. And so that impacted me because I think context matters. Context matters. He knew how to take his information and synthesize it to the point where as common people could understand what it is that he was trying to get at. He understood systems and structures in a way and could articulate it in a way from people from who are on the margins, and he knew how to speak that language. And so you have to be able to do both. You have to be able to understand it academically, but also from people from the margins. And I think Dr. King did that better than anyone I know.
I believe we can look at the legal impact of Dr. King's life and legacy to understand his impact on today's society. First, there is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This act, despite the persistence of racism and all of the things that we are still fighting against today, opened the doors for African Americans to gain access to spaces and places that were once considered off limits to Black and brown families. Secondly, we consider the influence of the Voters' Rights Act, which is extremely important given the fact that we have just gone through a presidential election. Even more so knowing that African American women paved the way for presidential-elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to enter the White House. And so again, I think that we can't even begin to fully understand all of the nuanced impact of Dr. King's life and legacy. At the same time, I think that any great fight or any great battle leaves room for the next generation. And so I think today we're still fighting against some of those injustices. We're still looking for access. We're still looking for opportunity, but we're fighting in a very different way because of the way that Dr. King chose to live his life.
I mean, Martin Luther King Jr.'s teachings have impacted the world in so many ways. We learn about them in schools, and we hear his I Have a Dream speech, and we talk about character, and we talk about him as a civil rights activist. And he's done so much for that, and a lot of the words that he said has continued. There are things that resonate on protest posters, protests that have happened in the past summer. There are words that stick on those posters. There are speeches that get constantly repeated so that we can hear them again. They are like his letter from a Birmingham jail, in which we can apply to today. And I think like it's really sad that we have to continue to apply words that were written in the 60s to life in 2020 and beyond. But there's still so much that needs to be done in race relations that we need to go back to the words of someone who made an impact. We need to go back to the words of someone who understood and who pursued civil rights and had this beautiful, interwoven faith and peaceful way about it. And that impact has lasted till today.
Martin Luther King Jr.'s teachings have impacted a lot of things in today's society. His teachings have shown the world of equality and justice, and from him, the world has seen that everyone deserves to be treated equally. He has impacted many facets of society, from education to government, and society is ever-changing, and Martin Luther King Jr. has impacted the way that people take on change and approach change. He has inspired generations of leaders to make change despite the views of society, positive or negative. And he has shown that even when there are obstacles, the end result is always worth the fight. Though Martin Luther King Jr. has fought a hard fight, there is still much to be won in the United States. The laws may have changed, but the image is still tainted. There is need for reform in the judicial system, and much work to be done through education and proper media coverage.
I look to Dr. King's example, particularly moving here to Chicago for a year. He was asked by an already well-organized movement in Chicago to come and help them work here. And I think about all that Dr. King had to offer and all of the influence he already had, and what a great speaker and pastor he was, and well-respected in his community. He was not well-respected by everyone because he fought for change, but he was well-respected where he was. And he uprooted his whole family and came to a new city, a city where people were violent towards him. And he did that because he was asked to help. And I'm not the great speaker that he was. I'm not the influential pastor that he was. But whatever gifts I do have, I look to him in the way that he listened to other people and listened to what the people that he intended to serve needed.
Today, we honor the life and legacy of civil rights movement leader, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We also can link this moment to the significant time in our history as Americans of seeing the first female, African American, Indian American vice president, Kamala Harris. But they also have significant linkages to each other. Both are products of historical Black colleges and universities, and both are members of African American Greek letter organizations. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. went to Morehouse University in Atlanta, Georgia, and he became a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. In that particular fraternity, which serves as the largest African-American intercollegiate fraternity, their aims are manly deeds, scholarship, and love for mankind. Motto is, first of all, servants of all, we shall transcend all. They have been responsible in providing leadership and service during the Great Depression, as well as the Civil Rights Movement, which Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was a pivotal leader of. Their organization addresses social, economic, cultural, and political issues of people of color, such as AIDS, urban housing, as well as Brothers Keeper and the World's Policy Council. The fraternity was also directly responsible for the conception, funding, and construction of their member, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s memorial in the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Kamala Harris, like myself, is a member of Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, which is the first African-American sorority founded at Howard University, where Kamala Harris actually graduated from. In our sorority, our aim is to improve the social and economic conditions through social initiatives as well as service initiatives, such as those relating to education, family, health, and business. A couple of initiatives have been the Mississippi Health Clinic, as well as lobbying for federal legislation and a congressional, national, nonpartisan lobby for civil and democratic rights. We also have been an organization for the last 3 years on one day has been able to fundraise $1 million to support the funding of historical Black colleges and universities. Overall, being a part of historical Black colleges and universities, as well as Greek-lettered organizations that speak to African Americans, means that they both individually saw that they could do things together with their brothers and sisters that they also call sorority and fraternity members, and being a part in service and resources and policy making and efforts that are so much bigger to them. And that's why I am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. It's also about making sure that you hold yourself accountable, but also being able to do those efforts with others to serve all mankind, which is the motto of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. It is very unique that we get to honor such a legacy like MLK Jr., but also be able to bring in a new day, a dream seen and come into fruition by the inauguration of Kamala Harris. Please understand these legacies have more to do with just tailgates and parties, but have to do with service that impact our communities, especially the African American issues of the day. And so I'm very proud to show you the linkages between these two and HBCUs and Greek letter student organizations, as they were also founded by college students, just like all of you at North Park. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you to all of the panelists who were able to provide those wonderful reflections. At this point, I would like to ask my panelists to begin to pop open their cameras so we can get started with the panel discussion for this afternoon. So can all of my panelists please begin to pop on your cameras? Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Just a word of mouth, if I am not providing you with a question, please make sure that you keep your mic muted just so we don't have any feedback. So for my panelists, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. They're going to provide some thoughts and reflections regarding several questions that I sent them, connecting the life and legacy of Dr. King, but also connecting that to Vice President Harris. And so before our first question, before we get started, I would like to ask each of the panelists, could you all please share your name, major, and different things that you're a part of on campus? And so I'm gonna just start off with our Vice President of Student Government, the Student Government Association, Brooklyn Seals.
Hi, my name is Brooklyn Seals. I'm an elementary education major with a special ed endorsement. And this year I have the honor of serving as SGA Vice President, which has been really great. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you, VP Brooklyn. Now, can I have Tafumi, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tiffany, and I am a sophomore at North Park University here. I am a double major of business and global studies. And some of the things I do on campus is that I am a resident representative also with the SGA on campus. I am a treasurer for the Rising Dreamers United. It's a diversity club on campus, and an African culture club as well, which I serve as the vice president on campus.
Thank you, VP Tafumi. Next, we will hear from Erica Russell. Erica, could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Erica. I major in business with a concentration of marketing. I am a secretary at Black Student Union, and I also work at Brando Library as a circulation desk attendant.
Thank you, Erica. And last but not least, John, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is John. I'm majoring in conflict transformation studies. I am the Chief Advocacy Officer for SGA, and I am a part of Black Student Union, African Cultural Club, and the Art Club at North Park.
Thank you all for those wonderful introductions, and thank you all for each of the important work that you do on campus as leaders. The way this panel will go is I have a series of 7 questions that I will ask you all. If everyone's not able to respond to the question for the sake of time, that is perfectly okay. I will not call out anybody's name to answer the question, so I ask if you're ready to respond, just go ahead and unmute yourself and provide a response. With that being said, I'm gonna get into our questions for this afternoon. The first question I have for the panel today is, when and where did you first hear about the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.?
I can share on that a little bit. So Dr. King is someone that I've been really drawn to since I was very young. So I'm from very rural, very white northern Wisconsin. And for most of my life, I was the only Black kid, not only in my grade, but my school typically. And I remember in the 3rd grade, I did my interest fair project on important civil rights leaders. And that was not what the interest fair project was. It was supposed to be on rock candy and volcanoes and whatever. But that was like the first year that they had taught us anything about the civil rights movement. And I was just so like, I didn't at the time, I didn't know why I was so drawn to these people. But I just was. And so I spent like the entire week just researching, and I went into my garage and I grabbed a little radio that I found, and like my mom got me like a CD of MLK's I Have a Dream speech, and I would just listen to it over and over again. And like in the 4th grade, I had like most of it memorized. I was like, Dr. King has like from a very young age, like I've been so drawn to. So like now I know that I was fascinated with MLK and these other figures in the civil rights movement because they were role models who looked like me in a time where I didn't even have anyone who looked like me. So yeah, from a very, very young age, like Dr. King has been a lot to me. And it's cool to now like know why that is and to be able to live out that legacy that for a long time I was just like, wow, that's really cool.
Thank you, VP Seals. Tafumi, could you please go ahead and respond?
Yeah, so I'm kind of jealous of Brooklyn right now. Unlike VP Seals, I heard actually and learned a little bit about Dr. Martin Luther King when I was a junior in high school. So my family moved here from Nigeria, and just being new to the whole, social life and everything of the United States, I didn't really understand what a lot of things meant. But I think that at the time I was a junior, I was starting to gain my balance, and understand little by little what, certain people represent, what certain events in the history of America represented. And I was taking a US history class, I remember. And, my teacher was talking about the civil rights movement, and he mentioned Dr. Martin Luther King, and he just kept on talking on and on, and I had no idea why. I was like, okay, like we've been here 30 minutes, and we're talking about the same person. So after class, I went to him and I was like, I noticed that you were talking and passionate about the subject that you were talking about for a very long time. And he was like really shocked that I asked the question because, students just walked out of the class. And I was kind of drawn to that because I felt like he had more to say, but he didn't have the time. And he, gave me a little, speech on what he is, who he is, what he stood for, how he has impacted the history of the United States, and how so many generations have and still growing in his words and his speeches and the things that he stood for. And I felt like that was one of the only times in high school that I actually had an interest when it comes to history. And although sometimes I find it hard to find my balance and identity, I feel like learning about the legacies of Dr. Martin Luther King is helping me day by day to understand where I stand when it comes to my identity.
Thank you, VP Tafumi, for sharing those insights. Do John and Erica want to respond to this first question before we move on? All right, we'll move on to the second question then. The second question I have for you all, and actually I kind of relate to hearing it at a young age from Brooklyn's point. My dad is an Alpha, and Dr. King was a part of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. And so as you can imagine, my home is full of walls and pictures of Dr. King. And I've been attending Dr. King ceremonies and Dr. King brunches since I was a shorty. And so I can definitely relate to learning about Dr. King at a very early age. But the second question I have for you all is there a specific quote or a moment in Dr. King's life that resonates with you? If so, could you please explain why?
I would like to share. I think it's where the speech took place in Washington, D.C. It's him with his hand waved, and then you can see people in the crowd while he's speaking. I always think about that when I'm going to do something that's hard or scares me. And it's just the fact that no matter what, there's people who believe in you, even if you fail or not popular with your opinion or choices, there's still going to be someone waiting and looking at you. And I just think about it all the time. Like, I can do it. I can do it. It's going to be there. And it's crazy because everything that he talked about was there. I don't know. It just makes me, I don't know. It just makes me happy looking at that picture.
Thank you for providing that example. Imagery is so important in how you embody the greatness of Dr. King. And so thank you for sharing that. Tafumi, please go ahead.
I have a few quotes. So, just looking back at Dr. Martin Luther King and doing my little research on him, I feel like we don't really get that quotes and stuff. We get stories and speeches and stuff, but doing my own outside findings, I found that he said something about faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. And I think that resonates with me a lot, taking a leap of faith, trusting in yourself and your abilities, even though you don't know where it's going to lead you, even if you don't know where it's going to take you. And just like what Erica was saying, you just having that trial, and it's okay to be scared. It's okay to not feel confident about yourself sometimes, but getting out of your comfort zone. And as someone who sometimes I really don't like to take that extra step, I feel like learning about that, or like just focusing on that quote, sometimes pushes me out of my comfort zone to take the leap of faith, and to just take the first step, and then just continue going from there. Because it's like a domino effect. Sometimes it goes all the way to the end, sometimes it goes halfway. But trying to push that first domino is the thing. So, and another one is like, the time is always right to do what is right. And I feel like that one kind of goes with me as a student, and also as a North Park student. As a North Park student and as a person, sorry. And I remember last semester we had a town hall where a lot of people were talking about the differences that we had on campus and the changes and everything. And I feel like, you know, if we don't start to say what we have in mind right now, the time is never going to be right to say what we have in our minds. If you're postponing it and procrastinating and thinking someone else beside you is going to say it, they don't read minds. Nobody knows what you're thinking, except from you. So when you say what you have to say, when you say what you feel like, and it's also important to understand where you are, in saying what you want to say, because you never know if you're offending someone, or not taking other people into consideration with the words that come out of your mouth, or the actions you put forward. But then again, it's all centered into saying that if you don't make the change you want to see, nobody's going to do that. So starting that and doing that, there's never a right time to do something, but the time you do it is the time that's right. That's what I feel like. And those are the quotes that I've thought about, and gone back and forth in my head, in my life, and yeah.
Nah, thank you for that, VP Tafumi. I think it's very important for us to understand that Dr. King had a mentality that the time is now for us to make change. The time is now for us to speak our mind. The time is now for us to speak truth. And as you pointed out, speak that truth in love, speak that truth in care and empathy, but at the same time, make sure that you're speaking your truth. And kind of with that, this kind of leads into the next question I have for you all. And I would love to hear from everybody if possible. How do you apply the ideals and teachings of Dr. King's life to his work in your leadership positions on campus right now?
I can share. So I thought it was really interesting when Erica shared on an image of what resonates with her, like in a moment in MLK's life, because the same was for me, but it was an image of like where MLK's like staring out the window, like with his arms crossed, just like looking like he has the weight of the world on his shoulders. And so what I get from that is like the word humble strength comes to mind. And like, I have these positions because Dr. King and millions of Americans fought for my right to hold these positions. And like, I have the power of generations of people who came before me, fighting for these things, and who got me here. So like, because of that, because I know that I have that behind me, I can walk in that like with my head held high and like honor that legacy by doing and continuing in the work that they started. Yeah.
Thank you, Brooklyn, for starting us off. Everyone else, please go ahead. VP Tafumi, go right ahead.
So how I put Dr. King Jr.'s work in any leadership position I hold here on campus is that I like to think that I have a purpose, and I live with intention. I have a purpose and I have a cause, and I believe that every human, no matter where we find ourselves, we have a particular reason for being at that point in time, at that moment. And I like to think about me coming to North Park has a reason. And I did not mention this before, but I'm also like a mentor, campus mentor on campus. And for like first generation students transitioning from from high school to college life. And I think that is just one of the many reasons why I'm where I am today. Because I feel like I have helped myself with learnings and teachings and speeches and videos and stuff, help myself to learn how to put myself in positions where I can not only benefit the people around me, but also help them to reach their full potential. And doing that by perseverance, because sometimes, I mean, we're only human and sometimes we forget that, but having that at the back of our heads that we can only do so much sometimes is like a reality check. Because sometimes we say yes to a lot of things and we try to be there for a lot of people and a lot of things at the same time, and we stretch ourselves so thin, especially as students on campus. And I know I do that a lot. But having and knowing that I have a purpose and I have a cause and I'm there for a reason and I'm doing what I'm doing for a reason, is something that I believe has helped me to kind of move through different steps in my life, in my college career, to be exact. It's been really hard as a first generation student. It's not super easy to understand everything at once. So I think that I've been taking baby steps from like my freshman year, and now I'm at a point in my college career where I'm kind of confident in the decisions I'm making for myself now, and for the people that are looking up to me. So having that purpose in the main word is something I think is very important, and that's how I see it.
Thank you, Tafumi. John or Erica, real quick, would you like to share how you apply Dr. King's ideals and teachings to your leadership positions? Erica, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'd say that I always remember like Tafumi said, purpose, and also like where I come from. So the reason I know that I went to college is, for one, yes, I want a degree and I want to, be successful, but I also want to use whatever I have and split it from where I come from, the neighborhoods I've lived in. Like I lived in Chicago all my life on the South Side. I didn't been through like Section 8 housing, all that type of stuff, and I've experienced it. And it's not as easy to get out of that stuff. Like I'm one of the people that made it out, but I always think about other people from where I come from. So I always think of the world as like, yeah, I have a purpose to be here, but also in the sense of what am I going to do when I achieve what I want to be successful? I want to give back. I want to be able to say, like, help other people who are underprivileged and stuff like that, and just provide assistance, more assistance, because like Martin Luther King said, you can, like, I just think of that root, like two words, I can't all the time. Like it's going to happen. You just have to be patient and memorize, like, why am I here?
And John, let me hear from you real quick before we move on to the next question.
Yeah. Most of what I was going to say was said by everybody else, but also in my position as the Chief Advocacy Officer, I apply some of his teachings specifically to not accept some of the statements that are said about him that are used against people of color, just to water down what he was saying, to tell people of color, like, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that because Martin Luther King said this. So, and Martin Luther King, a lot of what he said was not, a lot of white people did not like what he said at all. And I think a lot of his statements were radical, and I want to try to take that radicality to dismantle the oppression and racism that happens today.
Thank you, John. And thank you for pointing out the fact that white people did not like Dr. King. They did not like his words. And as we even saw on Monday, that there are people who tend to sanitize versions of Dr. King for false cause of unity instead of calling out the injustices and systems that are still oppressing people of color to this day. And with that being said, the next question I have for you all before we switch to inauguration is, can you please, I know it's been several years and we've made several gains of the pursuit of justice and equity over the years since Dr. King's assassination. However, we as a society still see America has significant work to do. Could you all real quick identify one or two areas, again, real quick, one or two areas that you feel like America still has work to do?
I can quickly share. I think one area that our country needs to pursue equity and justice in is our education system. Schools are still heavily segregated, heavily unequal. And while this is like very valid in K through 12 institutions, it's also very valid in higher ed because college is a primary pathway for upward mobility for so many Black and Brown students. We need to be doing everything that we possibly can to implement practices, policies that empower Black and Brown students.
Go ahead, Tafumi. And then John, after that, I think I saw you unmute yourself.
I'll say one is our healthcare system, especially with the past, with the pandemic happening right now. A lot of people are struggling to get vital access to healthcare, be it treatment, tests, and mental health professionals. I feel like we have a little I don't want to say problem, but there is still a little struggle with having equality when it comes to the healthcare system.
Yeah, I was going to add off of Brooklyn's. I heavily agree that the education system needs a lot of work, and institutions like North Park definitely need to have some work done, especially how institutions like to use Black and Brown people for their own gain and not for the gain of, and they don't actually put anything into the communities that they are using for profit.
I would like to add on, I think one of the biggest issues we need to face is poverty. There's not equal gentrification. Like, I know there's a good side of gentrifying a neighborhood only to give like food stores and more like community centers, yes, but not to build something that's going to profit off not going to that community. Like, for an example, in Inglewood, I'm noticing that on 63rd Street, it's a lot of markets and stuff like that. But then when you go down the street, there's still rubble from the Family Dollars that burned down next to the shoe store. Like, you're building all of these markets, yes, but what are you doing to the rest of the neighborhoods? It's just going to kick those people out who can't afford the stuff that's there. Where are the jobs? It's crazy. And I think people need to start thinking about that, because I feel like as Chicago still dealing with like the pandemic, you see they're still building skyscrapers and stuff. Why is that money not being used to people in my neighborhoods or other neighborhoods who are poor right now to give them access to food or mask or something like that? The mayor only sent us one mask in the mail and that was it. Like, how do you know? It's just confusing. Like, what are our values as a country and even as a city sometimes?
Thank you, Erica, for that. And to your point, gentrification is, in my opinion, an ugly sin that directly affects Black and Brown people on the South and West sides more than affects anybody on the North side. And unfortunately, what we see on the South and West side are many Black and Brown folk who aren't able to afford these $1 million homes, when in reality, their grandparents were living there before some millionaire decided to develop property there. But with that being said, we're going to switch gears to the historical moment we just saw today, with VP Kamala Harris being the first Asian American, as well as the first Black woman and the first woman in general to hold the title of vice president. That in itself should get a quick round of applause. It took a little bit too long. But with that being said, can you all share some words that come to mind when you think about this exciting day that we have today?
I can start up. So just like a word that comes to mind just thinking about it is like hope. Watching the inauguration this morning, I think the reporter said it took only, well, he used the word only, but I don't think it should be only 100 years before women were able to vote to have a woman in this position today. And I think that it did take a lot of time. However, maybe it's the right time now, because times are rolling, times are changing, and change is very, very important sometimes. And I feel like having VP Harris empower for me as a person is like thinking and knowing that I can, as a woman, as a Black woman, I'm able to do anything at all. And it's just having that figure, having that person in that position, holding that position and representing women and Black women. It just gives a lot of hope. That's what I think. It gives a lot of hope to African Americans. It gives a lot of hope to Black Americans, and the communities that they stand for, and the country as a whole, because I don't think anybody saw that coming. So it's a big change, and hope is one of the words, and maybe the only word that comes to my mind.
Thank you, Tafumi. Go ahead, Brooklyn.
Yeah. So this came to mind when Raven spoke in the video, and she said the word pride. And definitely pride is what comes to mind when I think of Kamala being inaugurated. When I think of the most powerful people I know, all of them are Black women. And I think back to a conversation that we had with Dr. Peter St. John, and he said the importance of listening to Black people, because he used the phrase, we are pregnant with knowledge and we have so much to offer. And I just think of the way that the country needs us right now. The country needs a woman as vice president. The country needs a Black woman as vice president. And I think just pride in like what we have to offer and what we're bringing to the table in the national, the international, and the North Park scale. Yeah, definitely pride.
Thank you, Brooklyn. I like the words hope and pride. John or Erica, do you all have any words that you would like to share about what this historic day makes you think of?
I agree with them, but I just can't, I keep saying we did it, Joe, in my head. And the only thing that pops up is women, 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 because of my shirt. So all day I'm just like, we did it, we did it, we did it. Like, finally a woman. Like, it took time, but we did it, like you said.
Thank you. I think of that viral video of VP Harris just saying we did it. It happened. Thank you all for that. And kind of the next question, and potentially the last question I have for you all today is, can you share the importance of how VP Harris's being elected in this position, the effect it will have on future generations of women going forward? I can think about I have a little homie, one of my good friends has a daughter, her name is Skylar, and I'm thinking about Skylar right now and how she is able to see someone who looks like her sit in the White House and have such power. And it really makes me smile because it's dope that Black women and other women and Asian women have not seen that representation. And so what is the effect that you all think will happen for younger generations of women and even generations now of seeing VP Harris being in that position?
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Marcus. I remember after we got the results of the election, and there were a lot of videos circulating online of like young girls just staring at the TV of videos and pictures of Kamala. And some of them so young, they probably didn't understand exactly what was going on, but they saw someone who looked like them, and they saw someone who was powerful and who everyone was looking at and looking to. It fills me with hope that my children will grow up in a world where it's more normalized to be powerful and to hold positions of power. I know I grew up being the bossy one, the loud, the whatever people like to call Black women. And so my hope is that with it more normalized and with it more public, that Black women are capable and deserving of power. I would hope that my future child will be known as bold rather than bossy. And yeah, that's what I hope to see from Kamala's vice presidency.
I think you should trademark that phrase right there, bold rather than bossy. I think that is a powerful phrase that resonates with women, especially Black women in this country. Anyone else want to share a response to this last question? Well, with that being said, that is the last question I have for this panel on this day. I thank you all for providing the insights that you did. Each word that you said, I think is wonderful, and I'm glad we're recording this because this just goes to show the power and influence that our North Park students have. Our students are thinking about these things, North Parker family, and they are thinking about them heavy, and they want to see justice and change, not only in the global world, but also on our campus. So thank you to VP Brooklyn, thank you, John, thank you, Erica, and thank you, VP Tafumi. With that being said, before I provide my closing remarks, I would like to give an opportunity to our president, Mary Surge, to provide some remarks. So if Catalyst, if you are able to provide her an opportunity to put her camera up, please do so.
Let's see here.
Good afternoon, President Surge. The floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, Marcus. And this is a surprise. Thank you for inviting me to greet you. I've been delighted to listen into this very informative and wonderful time of education. So thanks to our faculty members, Dr. Alulis and Dr. Peterson. Thank you, Rich, for hosting today. And Marcus, thank you. And I want to also thank Director Cherie Myricks for her leadership with this day. Most of all, to our students, I want to say thank you for your honesty, for your sharing of your heart, your experience, your stories. That is what makes up the life of North Park. And even as we step into this very hopeful day in a service and a ceremony this morning that I saw very steeped in faith and in hope for the future, we will do the same. And we are grateful that we call on the name of Jesus here, and that is our greatest hope. But I'm so grateful for the honesty and the support that you are finding in each other, and your courage and your optimism to speak and to identify hope on this very hopeful day. So thank you, Marcus, for your leadership here as well. And thank you for the opportunity to greet.
Thank you, President Surge, for those words, as we also have a historical president in President Surge as the first woman to be president of North Park University. And so we thank you for the way that you are history on this campus as well. With that being said, we are beginning to wrap up today's event. And so in closing, I'd like to extend in gratitude and thanks to all those who have attended today's event. I want to give a special shout out to UMC for putting together that marvelous video. I'd like to give a special shout out to all the people who provided their remarks in the video. Thank you, Resident Director Raven Rush. Thank you, Dr. Hodge. Thank you, Professor Isabel LaRaza. Thank you, Joseph Butler. Thank you, Chase Friel. Thank you, Erica Russell. Thank you, Professor Rochelle Aikney. Thank you, Dr. Hodge. I hope I didn't forget anybody. Thank you, Deanna Boyles. And also like to provide special thanks as well as to the Catalyst office for giving us the opportunity to partner with you all in this event. Also give thanks again to Professor Joe Alulis, also Professor John Peterson for their insights on inauguration. I'd like to remind everybody who is watching that this is the first part in a two-part series of North Park's annual MLK celebration. Again, I'd like to repeat, this is part one. We will be coming back again together on February 3rd, where we'll be joined by Mickey Kendall, who is a Chicago native. Mickey Kendall is the best-selling author, activist, and cultural critic. Mickey Kendall talks about intersectionality, policing, gender, and other current events. Mickey Kendall is the author of Amazon's Abolitionist and Activist, as well as the author of Hood Feminism. Mickey will be joining us on February 3rd at 12:30, but the celebration will also begin with viewing a chapel service at 10:30, and then the Catalyst session will begin at 12:30. If you're interested in attending this event, you must RSVP. If you want to be in the Zoom room with Mickey Kendall, you must RSVP on Campus Labs in order to receive the Zoom link. There is a limited number of space, so please, if you want to be in the room with Mickey Kendall, make sure you RSVP. The event will also be live streaming like this one on Facebook Live. Finally, there will be a book raffle. So for students who RSVP for this event, you will be able to be entered in our raffle to receive Mickey Kendall's book, Hood Feminism. So please, If you are interested in the event, RSVP so you can enter into the book raffle. And before I pass it over to Catalyst and to Emma Trace to wrap things up, I'd like to leave you all with this MLK quote from one of his last sermons that he preached. Dr. King said, "We are tied together in a single garment of destiny, caught in an inaccessible network of mutuality. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." He goes on to say, "I could never be what I ought to be until you are who you ought to be. And you cannot be who you ought to be unless I am who I ought to be." Dr. King was always big on the community taking responsibility for change. North Park, what will we do in order to make sure this is a loving community for all people? Emma, I pass it over to you. Thank you.
We just wanted to thank you for joining our virtual Catalyst on Campus experience. We would especially like to thank Dr. Alulis, Dr. Peterson, Assistant Director Payne, Director Sherry Mayricks, and our student panel, Brooklyn, Tafumi, Erica, and John. We hope that you will join us for the important follow-up to this event and the Office of Diversity and Intercultural Life's official celebration of the Rev. Dr. King Jr. holiday on February 3rd. We will be joined by special guest, acclaimed author Mickey Kendall. Thank you.